CBD here, CBD there, CBD everywhere. So what do a panelist of experts think about the future of CBD-based products? My original intent with this footage, which was taken at the 2019 Groceryshop conference that I just attended, was to chop it up into digestible episodes and integrate my knowledge on the subject. But when I was re-listening to the footage, I thought it would take away from the integrity of the panelists' comments by indirectly taking comments out of the context of the whole discussion. That being said, I will have commentary at the end of this video. I will address and highlight a few areas that I believe need to be brought to attention for you guys, my audience. But until then, sit back and relax to an amazing expert panel discussion that includes, sitting left to right when you guys are watching this, Bethany Gomez. She's the managing director at Brightfield Group, which is one of the best sources for CBD market analysis. Jeremiah McElwee, he's a senior vice president of merchandising and product development for Thrive Market, one of the early online retail adopters of hemp-based and CBD products. Anthony Saniger, he's the founder and CEO of Standard Dose, which is a CBD-based online marketplace. Benjamin Witte, which is the founder and CEO of Recess, a beverage company that you guys have heard me talk about on several of my CBD videos. By far one of my favorite brands that are operating in the market currently, one that I believe everybody should be paying attention to. And then Dave Donnan, which was the moderator of this panel.
So with this panel, with this group, we really have the ability to kind of ask a lot of questions and get deep into both the future of CBD, but also what are some of the hurdles and issues that are going on. What I want to do is start the question with Bethany. And Bethany, as a managing director of Brightfield Group, really has done a lot of research and looked at the marketplace. So tell us a bit about the market for CBD, Bethany, and where you see its growth and what you see as some of the opportunities.
Sure, absolutely. So CBD is an absolutely fascinating industry. Prior to helping start this company, I used to cover mainstream CPG industries, health and wellness, food, drinks, tobacco, in emerging markets around the world. And I've covered a lot of industries, and I've never seen anything like this. The real explosion that we've seen in this market, both prior to the Farm Bill passing and in 2019, is really unprecedented. And this is really coming from a wide variety of angles. CBD has so much potential because it fits so neatly into so many global trends and so many CPG adjacent categories. And it's really resonating so much with so many different consumers. If we look at kind of a top-down viewpoint of CBD consumers, the initial stats are not incredibly surprising. We see a lot of skews a little bit towards women, but we see a lot of male users as well. A lot of early adopters are millennials, older Gen Zs. We have the average consumer has a tendency of being more well-educated, more middle class. Many consumers, more than half of consumers, are using at least twice a week. This kind of top-down viewpoint gives you a sense as to what's happening, but really what's so impressive to me about the CBD space is how many wildly different segments of consumers are emerging in the space that just really think about CBD in completely different ways, use CBD in completely different ways, and the different brands really resonate them in wildly different ways. We find that for many early adopters, or the stressed out millennials, or cannabis consumers who already knew what a cannabinoid was, they understood that and had buy-in that CBD had medical properties, that it had properties that were going to help them, but didn't necessarily want to be stoned all the time or have that THC component, that mind-altering component. Those are still a significant portion of the market, but now we see this growing cohort of what we call the glam users, people who are using as more part of a wellness lifestyle. This is not the people who are using every day for their daily symptoms and for their chronic pain or epilepsy or endometriosis or some of the more severe conditions, but they're using it to take a bite out of their day, to relax, to unwind, swap out for their afternoon cup of coffee, swap out for their glass of wine at the end of the night. So there's so many different use cases, and it's completely different product to so many different people. And that's where there's so much future potential in this market, and why product innovation is going to continue to drive this growth forward. We look at the growth in this industry is absolutely incredible. I mean, prior to the passage of the Farm Bill, the market hit $627 million last year, and that was with only these organic CBD companies that have grown up organically within the space. No outside revenues from CPG companies. They were being distributed only through independent retailers with no marketing budgets, and basically the entire industry was driven by word-of-mouth advertising. Within 2019, given this massive push into different distribution channels in the pharmacies and department stores and apparel retailers and even grocery channels now, but also through just about every type of independent retailer around the country, the natural food stores to yoga studios to acupuncturists to convenience stores, is really driving this growth, both in terms of retail penetration as well as driving those same store sales. Market is going to clear $5 billion this year, which is a growth rate of more than 700%. We expect as those, as the FDA does come out with regulations and the larger retailers can enter with larger category growth, as larger CPG companies can eventually enter, come 2021, 22, 23, then those market potential will hit $24 billion in the US alone. A great deal of this is coming from the distribution landscape shifting dramatically. When this market first started out, it was basically a bunch of products that were being sold through smoke shops and online, and that was about it. A few natural food stores, a few kind of mom and pop here and there. We've seen online sales decrease as a percentage of the total. We're seeing massive adaptation with adoption rates with natural food stores. We're seeing those chain retailers really start to take off and take the lion's share of that segment, and that's going to continue driving moving forward. But those independents really still drive a significant amount of value and do provide something that the chains are still really struggling with, which is that consumer education standpoint. There's, while consumers are growing and consumer awareness about CBD is growing, there's a real gap where people just don't understand what it is and what it does and how they can use it. And that's one of the biggest challenges that I think all of our panelists face today. One of the things that we can continue to speak about today is how we can overcome that education gap and tell people what these products do and how they can use them. That's a real challenge considering, according to the FDA, you can't make claims, and so how do you explain to people what your product does without telling them what it actually does? We're seeing massive shifts in terms of different product categories. 18 months ago, this market was predominantly tinctures with a few topicals, a few vapes, a couple of capsules mixed in there. We've seen an absolute explosion in product innovations over the past 12 months. In these products going into the beauty and skincare segment, into the drink segment, into pharma now, into pets, into all different aspects in all different areas of the store, and that's really what helps to propel this industry forward. So just a little bit to start
Thank you,
off
Bethany.
here.
That's given us all a good kind of grounding in sort of the growth and explosion. So, Jeremiah, with Thrive Markets, you've got into and have quite a selection now of CBD type products. Tell us a bit about the story there and how you got involved.
Yeah, for us, for those of you who aren't familiar with Thrive, we're a mission-driven retailer that is basically a club membership model where you pay an annual membership fee. We donate a free membership to a lower-income family, teacher, military veteran, or first responder for every paid member that joins. And our mission is to democratize access to healthy products. So for us, we launched almost 5 years ago in November, and almost instantly we had demand for CBD and hemp products. So historically in the natural and organic trade, we've always sold hemp seeds as a food source. We've sold hemp-containing products that are seed-based, but suddenly this pent-up demand for CBD and healing aspects were there. So we were actually a very early adopter of CBD and hemp full-spectrum hemp products based on the demand from our customers. And you saw on Bethany's slides the impact that online has had, and we were receiving love letters from our members around the country just saying thank you so much for bringing these products on. And I think our whole model fit nicely because we curate everything based on quality and food safety and test results on finished good products. So for us, we provided to our members this safe place where they could come and know that we vetted these products. And we jumped in with a brand called Charlotte's Web, who has a lot of history in the space. And then shortly thereafter, we were able to find a really high quality source of hemp that didn't have a brand in the marketplace, third generation farmers who worked vertical and processing on their own, who just had exceptional quality. So we dove in on private label with their private brand, Thrive Market brand, very early on. And subsequently, we just had so much demand that we fanned out, and now we have several other brands on the side, but it's been a definite love affair. I think the only other thing I'd like to add in terms of Thrive Market's position on hemp is, there's over 25,000 uses of hemp-based products, including being a tremendous rotational crop for regenerative agriculture, including being an amazing food source, including fiber and everything in between. So for us, we don't view it strictly as CBD as the opportunity. We view it as this magical plant that's always been there, that now is being deregulated, that people can really begin to realize the benefits of. So just throwing it out there from our perspective, we don't view hemp as this one-dimensional or even two-dimensional animal. We view it as this amazing plant that has so much to offer the planet and people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do work with soy farmers, and a lot of soy farmers are now saying, well, maybe I should go into hemp because I can't sell my soy anymore. So, Anthony, Standard Dose, tell me a bit about what you do. You're in the New York area, and you've got a really interesting curation on wellness category. Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so I started in the brand and marketing space. I've been doing that for the past 15 years, predominantly across all categories, but beauty and fashion became my sweet spot over the past 7 years. During that time, I started launching fragrance brands and beauty brands, and started falling into kind of this wellness trap where a lot of brands were coming and saying, hey, athleisure is the thing, or everyone's doing yoga now. All of these kind of Eastern principles were suddenly coming to the West, and all the consumers were sitting there going, we're going to do this now. So started falling into this trap where all the brands that I was working on was this, but at the same time I was super stressed out. Couldn't sleep at night, working in New York City in Manhattan agency culture. You work till 1 a.m., 2 a.m. every night. And so I was looking for the best CBD products for sleep, and that's kind of how I started to discover the brand. As I was looking for sleep products, I started curating and testing a bunch of different brands, curating over and testing over 300 different brands. Looking, do they have CBD in the product? Because there's a lot of products out there that are good and some that are bad as well. Do they actually have other terpenes or cannabinoids in them that they claim to have in them? Do they have any pesticides? We're dealing with a plant, so are there pesticides that were on the crop? Because of the lack of regulation, that really meant to me that there needed to be a marketplace that was trying to set some sort of standard for the products that you see on the market, and making sure that the products that the consumers are getting, as we talk about this huge market, that market opportunity, I think it's really important that we make sure that the quality of those products are really great, right? If we suddenly get bad products sitting on the shelf and consumers pick those up, someone gets hurt, someone gets injured in this kind of gray area where the FDA has made some comments and not other comments, and everyone's kind of sitting there waiting. So we launched as a multi-brand marketplace. We now have about 50 different brands. We have about 120 SKUs. We've expanded beyond just CBD and looking at other medicinal plants. So we're doing things with ashwagandha and reishi mushrooms. We're doing things with turmeric. And we really see this as consumers are looking for natural alternatives to pharmaceuticals. And so for our longer and bigger play is CBD is a massive part of this story, but for us it's how do you help with sleep, pain, anxiety, stress, issues. I mean, the CDC said that sleep is the number one national crisis right now. 50% of Americans don't get enough rest at night, and so it's super crazy when you think about that. And people are not wanting to take Ambien anymore, ibuprofen that we're popping every single time. And so for us, we were really looking at it in a way of CBD is one miracle plant that we can use to help solve some of these issues, but there's a lot of other plants as well. So we really saw this as more of a wellness lifestyle, where we incorporate things like yoga and meditation into our retail space, where you can actually try to bring yourself to a calm space by doing that, not just taking CBD, because it's all has to work together, right? If you're just taking CBD on a daily basis, but you're not actually doing things to reduce stress in your life, or you're not doing things to help you, like taking technology out of your bedroom, then you're actually not going to sleep at night, or you're still going to be stressed. And then you're just using CBD as a way to kind of fix the symptom and not really the root of the problem. So we think that this holistic wellness lifestyle, you have to look at that in a very 360 approach. And it's not just about the product, but in our retail space, we want to educate them and talk about this more holistic wellness approach.
Yeah, I think that the whole wellness approach that we're seeing CBD is a good thing, and I totally agree with that third-party testing and everything. There's just so much product out there that we just have no knowledge of, and without regulation, which we don't really have right now. My joke is, if people think cannabis is the wild, wild west, then CBD is Mad Max. So CBD is cannabis without the regulations. So it's a market that I'm glad you're relating that was groundwork there. So Ben, you have Recess, a beverage, and again, you brought it to market. Tell us a bit about why a beverage product, and how did you get started?
Yeah, so similar to Anthony, about 2 years ago, I started experimenting with CBD myself because I've always been a kind of naturally wired, hyper anxious millennial. And when I started using CBD oil regularly throughout my day, I felt much more balanced and even keeled. And as a result, I was more productive, more creative, and less stressed out and anxious. And I just had a number of insights from that experience. The first is, I'm not the only one that feels this way. I think stress and anxiety is like the biggest issue of the 21st century. One of our taglines is an antidote to modern times. The second insight was that the compound CBD was effective for me, but the user experience of taking CBD oil throughout my day that tastes like grass was not a great user experience. And I really think CBD is ultimately a compound that's going to fade to the background, like caffeine or whey protein. And the value is going to be in kind of building the brand on top of the ingredient and marketing the solution and not the ingredient, and then kind of creating the right applications. In my opinion, the biggest one's going to be kind of ready to drink functional beverages. And so I think you have kind of a beverage category emerging that's going to be as large as energy drinks. That's going to happen kind of overnight, where similar to Red Bull is effectively just caffeine and taurine, but Red Bull and Monster are really competing on kind of the brand marketing and the feeling. Red Bull gives you wings, and that's kind of the approach we've taken at Recess. We're really not focused on kind of marketing the ingredient, but rather establishing a new kind of use case and consumption occasion in people's lives of taking a recess. And to us, that means taking a moment throughout your day to reset and rebalance so you can be your most productive and creative self. And there are recess you consume your body, like our drink, and recess you consume your mind, like our Instagram and our events that we throw a couple times a week at our space in New York called Recess IRL. And so we're really taking a lifestyle brand approach to the category. I think right now there's all this mania around kind of CBD where you can just slap on the label and it's going to move, but ultimately this is going to be brands that win here, and that's kind of the approach we take.
Okay, well, so building on that, and a question for all of us, FDA, and particularly CBD and edibles, but CBD generally, how are you dealing with that, and what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so when I started the business, it was still a controlled substance, so I basically bet my life that this would ultimately become kind of an approved food additive, but I was well aware of what would have to happen to get there. And so as you described earlier, the Hemp Farming Act passed in December of last year. And that effectively kind of shifted the regulation of hemp extracts and CBD from the DEA to the FDA. But something just doesn't go from a controlled substance to something you can actually drink and sell at Walmart overnight. There's obviously kind of a process that we're going through right now to kind of set the requirements of dosage, labeling, et cetera, et cetera. And it was just a complete misconception that the Hemp Farming Act was the end of the road. It was really the beginning of the road. But we're very engaged, talking with regulators and working with the FDA, and I anticipate clarity coming kind of next year. And so the way I like to think about this is I don't even think the game's really begun. It feels like CBD is everywhere, but it's actually nowhere. In kind of your slides, you see the opportunities in when the national retailers start carrying this product. So our business plan has been to become the default first choice for a national retailer or distributor kind of building out this category. And so over the past kind of 10 months since we've launched, we've really been kind of building out our organization, our supply chain, our infrastructure that's ready to scale rapidly when this goes, and it's going to go pretty quickly.
So Bethany, your views on FDA, and what do you see as kind of the next steps?
Sure. So what's happening right now is essentially this gray area where there's enough legal coverage for companies like those that are up here, that have a higher risk tolerance level and less to lose. I think that some of the larger companies can start to build up their brands, build up their positioning, build up their supply chains, and be able to get on the shelves, especially on topicals, but get on the shelves of independents, get on the shelves of chain retailers if they are in the topicals area, while the FDA is waiting for that clearance. Now, the FDA basically put up their hands and said, it's going to take us 2 to 3 years on our own fruition if we do this at our pace. As an organization, the FDA is not built to move quickly. They're built to move intentionally. They're built to create regulations that will protect consumers. However, this is kind of a situation where there's a market that's growing up around them, and there's a need to be able to move quickly to be able to protect consumer safety, because there are so many bad products on the market right now, like what we're seeing in the vape cartridge crisis. However, there's so much political power behind protecting this hemp industry, from Mitch McConnell and everyone who really advocated for this as a win for their farmers. There's no market for their farmers if there's no market for end products, which is why there's been such a push to avoid crackdowns or avoid over-regulation on the CBD space while the FDA works this all out. There was recently, Mitch McConnell's been putting forth some regulation or legislation that would speed this up and provide a more clear pathway. But essentially what we're expecting is that within approximately 18 months, we'll have a more steady state, more regulatory framework that will give retailers and give brands the guidance that they need to feel comfortable with that moving forward with CBD. So what that means in the short term is that all of the brands that are operating in the space today have an 18-month window before the large consumer packaged goods companies can come into the space and launch their own products, have that opportunity to build up their brands, to build up their consumer awareness, to build up their supply chain and their products, to either become an acquisition target or to become steamrolled once the big guys come in.
I think also, just to kind of touch on the difference that the FDA is going to weigh around topicals versus beverages and ingestibles and food. I think food's going to have a much longer haul and a longer road, while topicals we see already in the US. There is really no regulation on topicals as is today for most of all other ingredients. When you look at that in comparison with like the EU, that's the other things that we're doing and trying to keep all of this documentation on the brands is we ask for IFRA compliance for fragrance. We ask to make sure that they have tested their products, that they have liability insurance. We're getting a bunch of documentation from the brands that the minute the FDA does come in and make some sort of comment, whether it's from a food perspective or from a topical perspective, we can open up the folder on that brand with a list of all of their products. And we also do small batch testing as well, which I think is super important, because a lot of times these plants, it's grown in one batch for this year, and then next year it's a new batch. And even the farmers are working on their own processes with this and how they process the hemp. What is their facility? Is it organic? There's a lot of questions around that. And so I think as much as a retailer that you can do to have all of that documentation to support the fact that the products that you're carrying on your shelf are really great products that are not going to harm people, or the consumer is protected if they are harmed, right? So you have things like the product liability insurance. I think if you have that buttoned-up folder when the FDA does come in to have a conversation, you can say, hey, you didn't give us answers, but I have this whole folder here full of all of the information, and we're doing our best to try to protect consumer. I think most people in the retailer side want some sort of regulation or rules. We're scared of the pharma companies, I think, a little bit, of how much do they have control of the FDA ruling, but I think regulation is good in some ways.
And that's interesting that kind of companies with high integrity are really setting the rules. You're setting your own standards, your own set of regulations. So there's also the FDA, there's the unintended consequence of the FDA. Jeremiah at Thrive Markets, who had, with payment systems, had issues as well.
Yeah, we had, just to tag on one thought though, on what you shared, in addition to product safety, I think the other very sensitive area is claims related to products. So that's something to be really wary of, and something we've taken a hardline approach on Thrive Market. We make the claim full spectrum hemp. We avoid any health claims. We're monitoring reviews for egregious health claims that members may be making, so we don't get dinged on that. But on the payment processor side, again, we were an early adopter, so and we took that, to your point of being less risk averse, we took the approach of, hey, our members want this, we're going to dive in and have some high quality, super reputable brands that we believe in, and we were cruising along, just gathering the sales and communicating with our members, and then suddenly we got a notification from our payment processor saying, hey, we didn't realize you guys sold hemp, we're shutting you down, we're no longer going to process payments for, and again, it's mostly due to that conflicting guidance or lack of guidance that we're getting, where there's this discomfort from larger payment processors, which was who we were working with, where they're saying the risk is just too high. We don't know what's going to happen, and we're not going to be involved in that until we get some firm guidance. And fortunately for us, created quite a scramble. We actually, you probably saw which was also interesting, the letter that our CEO wrote to our members, which then got leaked to press, and we even had people saying, what a brilliant marketing strategy. We were like, no, actually, this is really how we communicate with our members, but we had to pull hemp products off the site for a period of time, so we found a payment processor who was willing to go there with us and willing to inherit that risk, and again, we had to go through that documentation around some of the areas you mentioned with food safety and liability, but also, really showing them, hey, guys, we're not making these egregious health claims. We're not, we're towing the line, but we're not going over the line, and we're being very conservative and responsible with the products we offer and how we position them to our members. So, again, it's still tenuous. We still are getting that feedback that we're going to do this with you, but we don't know for how long, and we have to wait and see what's going to happen here. And but for now, it's back to business as usual and with our members.
Well, I mean, that's the whole issue around the infrastructure, because cannabis was a Schedule I controlled substance. No federal agency can get involved, no banks can get involved, no law firms, no accounting firms, etc. And there's still that vestige, even though hemp has been legalized, there's still that vestige left over from the cannabis, and still federally is illegal. So it's kind of which means that consumer education, and not only consumer, but education of companies needs to be on place. So Bethany, from your perspective, one of the things we keep on hearing is we've got to educate the consumer, but at the same time we can't claim anything. Right. So what are the questions that consumers typically ask, and how best can a retailer or a product company help answer them?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things that's really important as retailers start hearing the products is those kind of in-store activations and those in-store materials. The first question that consumers need to understand is that this is a non-psychoactive product. We have to zoom back to square one. What is hemp versus what is marijuana? There is a lot of still confusion around that. What is cannabidiol? What is, how is it going to, affect the body? Now, you can't say that this cures cancer. You can't say that this cures anxiety. You have to say things like, it might possibly, do X, Y, and Z kind of things. So that's a real challenge, but at least level setting from a consumer standpoint, what is this plant? What is this product? What are even a typical dosage? When should you be consuming this? When, at what points in time should you be taking it, twice a day? Should you be taking it once a day? Should you, basic components about the product itself. Where was it grown? How was it cultivated? What is your cell story? Things about the testing. Testing is so important. Everyone understands that there's a lot of bad products that are out there, but that's not what's driving the market. The vast majority of the sales that are driving this market are coming from the more legitimate companies that do take their testing very seriously. And most of them did get into this space for very altruistic reasons. And so those, that testing, the components that they're validating, all of those components that will help consumers really understand and feel secure about the products are things that need to be communicated to them. Now, the actual testimonials, around what people use it for, that's really where the most effective way to do that and the most effective way to communicate that to consumers, is to go do your in-store activations at the point of sale and the retailers. give products away to the people that are working at those stores, let them try those products and give them to everybody they know, and then they will recommend to the people who are coming into the store what's worked for them. That's really all of the things that are really going to be able to bring this to life all come from anecdotes, but you can't publish any of those things, right? So those anecdotes and the testimonials of people, the reason why this industry has so much power and why it's been growing so quickly is because it really works for people, and they're so passionate about it. It's like this zealot, religious-like experience that people, when they find something that works for them when nothing else did, they're going to scream it from the rooftops and tell every single person they've ever met all about it. And that's what's really kind of propelled this. Last year it turned into a $620 million industry based exclusively off of word of mouth, right? So fuel the word of mouth. Get it in the hands of people and let them educate them about your product, what your product is, and let them see for themselves what it does.
Jeremiah?
I would just chime in. I mean, the only caution I would have there, so I agree with you, and evangelizing is always the best way to spread the gospel. But I think we have a framework for this. We have a framework for talking about herbal products and herbal medicine. We have a framework for talking about nutritional supplements with the DSHEA Act. And so I would just caution, yes, evangelize, but make sure your employees and make sure the people you're working with are trained and understand what DSHEA is and how to talk in structure function terms. And to your earlier point, not saying it cures X, Y, and Z, and here's why you take it and you'll get instant results. Because as FDA does their research and continues to go through this process, they're going to be looking for those people and places that are making those egregious claims.
Yeah.
And so, just a word to the wise, we lean heavily on the framework DSHEA provided, even though it's outside right now because there hasn't been guidance, because we felt like that's a conservative way to approach it so that people stay safe. And
right.
especially employees. I mean, I come from the natural product space where we've been selling ashwagandha and kava and all these herbs for 25, 30, 40 years. And, you can definitely get some ambitious employees on the sales floor that talk about how, ashwagandha saved my life because it did X, Y, and Z. And some of those are great, but once you cross into the structure from outside the structure function, you can get into big trouble.
But I think also just to kind of weigh in on the aspect that you only really have word of mouth. I mean, another kind of issue on the CBD space is really that we're limited on the marketing channels that we can actually do. So Facebook is now loosening a little bit. Google is still off the table, but you're still limited on a lot of traditional channels that you can advertise these products. So your only thing that you can rely on, which we do and you do as well, is events, but then you can't use things like Eventbrite because it has a payment processor, which doesn't allow for that. So you can do in-store events or in-store activations. That's why you have a pop-up. It's why I have a retail experience and jumped right into that from online and more D2C brands. You wouldn't see that kind of happening this early on in businesses, but I think you have to do that because your only option is word of mouth.
Yeah.
And it's just to build on that, I think each of these categories are different. We're very much a beverage brand first that just happens to include CBD. And I think our competition is LaCroix and Spindrift and kombucha and coconut water. There are a number of CBD brands popping up, but when someone's choosing a recess, I think, our idea, one of my frameworks is like, in the past, brands were built on the shelf and today they're built on your phone, and that changes everything. And to your point, we've spent no money on paid advertising. It's been entirely kind of content and experiences, both digital and physical, that we create, that consumers engage with deeply and then want to share with their friends. We have a very strong narrative at Recess, and one of the reasons, we're not allowed to say Recess reduces anxiety, but I also wouldn't think that's actually effective. So our message is Recess is an antidote to modern times. It helps you feel not tired, not wired, calm, cool, collected. And I think consumers are really buying into that narrative and then kind of spreading the word to their friends. So we get hundreds of organic Instagram tags per week of people just kind of telling their friends they're obsessed with Recess, and it makes them feel good. And that's kind of how the brand's been built.
Good. So from an audience point, I'm going to let in the audience, if you want to ask a question, I'm going to ask a couple more questions here, but there's going to be 3 roving mics in the various 3 sections. So if you have a question, you'll put your hand up and we'll get a mic to you and give you some time to think about it. Well, if you in the audience don't have questions, I've told the panel they can ask you questions. Turn things around. Okay, so dosage, I mean, standard dose, name the company. How do we know? Is 10 mgs enough? Is 100 mgs too much? How do we determine that when there is no real scientific evidence at this point, just anecdotal?
I mean, the trick of that whole name is there is no standard dose. That's been kind of our internal play on words, is one particular dose is not right for every single body. We're all made very differently. We all have an endocannabinoid system inside of our body. It interacts differently with CBD. So for a while, some people may take 5 milligrams and feel like, woo, and then others may just feel sleepy or 5 milligrams, and then others, they need to take like 33, 66, right? Most of the products that we have, and when you're talking about milligrams as well, there's a breakdown that's a lot of time confusing to the consumer. If you're looking at a 1 ounce bottle and it says 1,000 milligrams on the full bottle, it's talking about that's what's inside the full bottle. It's not talking about per dropper or per dose. So we try to break that down to the consumer. One 30 ml bottle is going to have 30 full 1 mLs. 1 ml of a 1 ounce bottle with 1,000 milligrams on the bottle is 33 milligrams, right? Sounds super complicated. I just said it in a very fast way. To the consumer, that's really confusing, right? And so we try to break it down for them, and we always recommend to them, start with a lower dose, work your way up. If you're starting with a product, what is the reason you're using that product? Without making claims, there are some products out there that will say, for relief, for example, and those may be using other cannabinoids in the plant in combination with CBD. So those may be looking at things like CPG and CBC, which are other cannabinoid profiles that will be talked about more in public in the future. Right now in the cannabis community, everyone's buzzing about these other cannabinoids and how we can use those and how we can amp up the dose of those in different products. And then we're also talking about terpenes, which have been around forever. But in the cannabis world, that's what we're talking about. But we're really looking at those different ingredients as the research starts coming to say, how can we add more like CPG or CBC to help specifically with relief? So I always tell the consumer first, why are you taking CBD? What do you want to feel? Why are you trying to incorporate this in your life? Do you really need this, right? The second part is start low, work yourself up, and see what's the right dose for you. And then make sure that you're looking at these other ingredients in combination, or if you're looking at a skincare product, right? It may have arnica in it, and you may be getting most of the pain relief from arnica or another plant-based ingredient. So you want to look at those other ancillary ingredients in combination with that. So there is no specific standard dose on CBD, but always start low and kind of work yourself up.
And just to build on that, I think I totally agree. And like an analogy I like to use is caffeine. Like some people can't drink coffees, others can have 4 coffees a day, including before bed. Why would CBD impact anyone differently? I can drink unlimited recess per day. Some people can drink 1 or 2. But one of the interesting things we've learned at recess is just the variety of consumption occasions for taking recess. So there's a group of people that drink a recess right when they get up in the morning to start their day calm, another group of people that drink it before bed to go to sleep. The core use case is kind of 10 to 4 p.m. as a productivity enhancer at work, at lunch, as a substitute for your 2 o'clock coffee. It works really well before or after a workout. It works well at bars and restaurants as a substitute for alcohol, as a mixer. So I think the story is that there's just so many different kind of use cases here, and also that the perceived effect of taking in these products is frankly a combination of the efficacy of the functional ingredients and how they interact with us each individually. But I think arguably equally importantly is like your intention and your expectation about what these products are going to do to you, specifically around anxiety, because anxiety is like something that's literally just like just in your head. So it's as much like what you don't feel as what you feel. And so I really think the experience like you're creating is going to be of equal importance to the compound itself.
Yeah, and I also,
I was just going to say, one of the biggest challenges about CBD is a lot of times when you're consuming caffeine, when you're consuming alcohol, you feel it, right? You feel it. If you consume THC products, you can feel when it hits you. So you can know, okay, this is too much for me. This is not enough for me. With many consumers, when I use a great deal of CBD for endometriosis, and I can feel it when it doesn't work. So, it's not necessarily that after 30 minutes, I'm all of a sudden the most zen person in the world. It's that, you notice if your pain doesn't come. And that's one of the challenges that consumers face, is that these products are not cheap. You want to start, especially if you're using for a medical condition and not just to kind of take a bite out of your day. If you're using for a medical condition, you want to know that it's going to work for you, but you don't want to spend $200 on a bottle if you don't understand whether the product's going to work for you or not. So then you start with these lower dosage products that may have way too low of a dose for it to actually have any impact on you as a person. And really, a lot of the effects for people who are daily symptom attackers come from using it frequently. You have to use it for several days. It builds up in your body, and that's how it impacts your system. And so, it's a much more challenging experience, and it's a much more challenging thing to communicate to people. But like those trial sizes, the components that are really going to, smaller pack sizes, things that are going to really drive trial and encourage people to take it a couple of times to be able to, really see if it works for them and to find that component, is really important. And that's why those types of products move very well through a lot of different channels. But it's not as easy as trying to understand your dosage level with, a THC product or a caffeine product or an alcohol product, because the perception is often, the effect is almost an absence of something. So how do you detect the absence of something?
The bioavailability as well. I mean, depending on how you're taking the product, if you're doing it as a sublingual that you're putting under your tongue, if you're using it as a transdermal patch, if you're using it inside of a beverage, those are all going to have different bioavailability, or even a capsule, right? If the capsule is microencapsulated, so then it's not going to break down until it gets deeper down into the digestive system. So when you start to look at how you're taking the product as well, that could affect the milligrams that are actually absorbing into your bloodstream. If you're putting it into a topical, the amount that you're absorbing through the skin is much more minimal than if you're putting it into an adjustable, right? If you're using a sublingual, you may get more milligrams in a less quantity than in a beverage, for example, where you're getting also the flavor of the sparkling beverage. And then you're getting the milligrams, not to dilute that, but it's more of how you're taking the product can also be correlated to the milligram and the dose that you're using as well.
One more wild card to throw in would just be whether you're using isolated CBD or versus a full spectrum hemp.
Could you explain that to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many components, and you touched on it earlier, that there's, in the cannabis community, there's just this awareness around the fact that CBD is but one component, one cannabinoid, and there's countless others, and each of them, there's two schools of thought, right? One is that they all work synergistically together and you get the most benefit by doing a full spectrum product. And then there's all this research happening on specific isolates to figure out what they will do in the body or what they could do, or and then really ratcheting down on the science around the dosage and the impact that some of those isolates can have. So, we're seeing that entourage, it's called the entourage effect, when all the cannabinoids work together to create an effect for someone versus taking just an isolated CBD. And we're hearing anecdotally that people are getting way more response out of a full spectrum product versus isolates. And but again, to your point, I mean, it's very much a tonifying plant, so it doesn't always, and that's the case with all herbal and plant-based medicine, right? I mean, we always tell people exactly what you said, which is you won't necessarily notice it, but you will feel better, and then you will notice it when you don't take it. And that effect of like, hey, I feel great when I'm doing this, I missed a day, suddenly what happened? My pain in my back's coming back that I didn't have. People, and that body awareness, I think, in addition to supporting the plant and the power of the plant, is really important for overall health and wellness. As you guys identified, if you're not helping consumers understand that this is not a panacea, it's part of an overall wellness routine, then you're going to have some disappointed consumers, because they're going to expect I can continue eating the standard American diet, not sleeping enough, drinking caffeine, and just throw 20 mg of CBD in, and I'll feel great.
Perfect.
It doesn't always
What's
work
wrong
out.
with that?
So any questions from the audience? We have a question over here. We'll get a microphone to this gentleman. There we go. Can you state who you are and then the question?
Michael Lavery from Pepper Jack. This is for Ben and Anthony. Have you had any difficulty sourcing extract, either quantity or quality or both, and how has that evolved?
Yeah, so for recess, funny, since the beverage, it has to be water soluble. So when I started the company 2 years ago, there was no concept of water soluble CBD. I literally started calling hemp farms in Kentucky and like, how do you put this in a drink? And I got connected to like some guy working out of like a breaking lab, bad lab, like, and so it's been amazing to see over the past kind of 2 years just how sophisticated and how much innovation there's been on kind of the supply chain. I would say though, I mean, we get hit by a company every single day now that wants to work with us, and it's very hard to kind of separate truth from fiction, the signal from the noise. And so we're working with a couple different suppliers right now. We're launching additional products. Each will require a different specific application. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation on kind of combining the different compounds to deliver specific effects. And so I like to think of functional ingredient stacks. And so in Groceryshop, in addition to broad spectrum hemp extract, we also use adaptogens like ginseng, L-theanine, and schizandra. And so I think kind of over time you can see a recess for sleep, a recess for focus, a recess for fitness, all would use kind of different compounds in hemp and potentially definitely combine other kind of botanicals. And so, there hasn't been an issue for us. I think the issue is trying to actually identify what's quality.
I think also we're mostly third-party brands. We only have 2 private label products right now. Both of those are from upstate New York. So right now there's a lot of farmers that are turning their farms into growing hemp to supply the demand that we see that everyone believes is going to grow. But the problem then, the breakdown is going to be in the processing side. A lot of the facilities don't have the proper equipment yet to process all of the hemp that we believe we are going to need for this market. One of the big things that's going to happen for a lot of the companies that are much larger is when you do start to incorporate plant-based ingredients, you need to be able to replicate that and to make it consistent across every single batch. For smaller brands, it's a little easier for them to adapt because they can say, hey, we have a little bit higher of a CBN profile in this full spectrum product compared to the last batch, right? Because they're doing it in a batch, they can market it that way. It's kind of like small batch brewery. It's a little bit different every time. When you start to look at a bigger company and you're trying to get that to a scale like a Coca-Cola, you can't mess with the taste, right? So at some point you need to have some sort of consistency. There's a lot on the science side that's also been playing. There's a company down in Florida that's working on replicating CBD molecules on a scale. So right now they can clone the molecule about 7 times. So on the science side, there's also companies that are going to hopefully, in some way, now that synthetic doesn't really live up to my mission, but does allow bigger companies to be able to create consistency in products. Otherwise, you have to create it as kind of this small batch in this short term.
Okay, good. Another question over here. Okay, I'll repeat your question. Go ahead.
Michael Adams was trying to healthcare executive a couple weeks ago, and he said
There, your mic's working now.
he said CBD is going to eliminate visits to the emergency.
Your mic works now, so you can use it.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
I had a conversation with a healthcare executive a couple of weeks ago, and his point was CBD products are going to eliminate unnecessary trips to the emergency room, which is a huge, huge cost. And although you've talked about retailers, I wondered what you thought insurance companies and the physician community and the hospital community, what role they might play once the FDA starts moving in 18 months.
Sure. So we've done a lot of research on the healthcare side of things, and one of the challenges right now for physicians and healthcare practitioners is that there isn't enough of the clinical research yet for them to feel comfortable making those recommendations. So there's a lot of companies that are deep into this type of clinical research. Some of the large CBD companies, but a lot of the Canadian LPs, on that aspect are investigating more in clinical research. There's certainly pharmaceutical companies. There's a lot of research that is in progress in universities that are conducting more of the clinical trials that and the type of high quality medical research that will allow those physicians to feel comfortable making those recommendations. And I think that will, once that research starts to come out, that will help to really drive the the medical aspect of that market, and to be able to overcome a lot of the issues with overprescription of opioids or things like that. There's a lot of challenges associated, a lot of further challenges that will come in terms of people over medicating themselves or things like that, that will come into play as the FDA comes down on what kind of the dosage restrictions are, things like that. But essentially, in order for the healthcare industry to really get on board, that's still several years out until some more of that clinical research comes to light and those physicians and healthcare practitioners have enough data to really feel comfortable making that recommendation to their patients.
So there is one FDA-approved CBD product, Epidiolex, which is used for childhood epilepsy. And so it's the only approved drug that's got CBD in it on a clinical level. But I think, Bethany, the research going on. My only concern with the research is most of the research is going around full-spectrum cannabis in Canada, because it's legal in Canada for all cannabis, and as well as in Israel, looking at full-spectrum cannabis as well, rather than just focus on CBD. Yes.
I would just add to your question too. I mean, insurance is one of the most wild areas right now of uncertainty, along with the banking, just because again, there hasn't been clear federal guidance yet. So we're hearing, all kinds of confusion with the insurers and where that will shake out. So to your point, we just need more science and more understanding of where this is going to go, and then that'll, fall into place around that. But it's definitely an area of big uncertainty right now.
I also see three different audiences here. So we have one, the more medical grade marijuana, where you have high concentrations of THC and high concentrations of CBD being used in more of a medical profession to help with things that I won't name because maybe the FDA is listening. But basically, as we get those clinical trials, I think they're going to be looking at what you just said of that. I think there's a middle segment, which is going to be more recreational marijuana usage, that usage or CBD, whether with THC or without. And I think that's going to be the recreational play that's going to happen in direct legal states. And then you're going to have the other side, which is more of the wellness user, which is the everyday consumer that I think both of us are talking to.
Okay, good. Another question. We have one here.
Yes, hi. My question is around...
Who are you? And just bring your question. So you just state your name. Then.
Sure, Laura Heller with Forbes. And my question is around the marketing and advertising side, where we know that you all are prohibited from doing that, but I haven't really been able to find much research on estimates or timelines that might take people that are in those industries there. At the moment, it seems to dovetail a little bit too much, or much with DTC brands. It's word of mouth. We're talking to influencers. We're, doing very grassroots level marketing. And I'm wondering if any of you have any research availability or opinions on this.
Sure, I can take that one. There's actually, since the Farm Bill passed, and really over the last 2 quarters, there's been a massive push into much larger scale marketing endeavors. And a lot more channels have opened up, especially for those that have significant budgets to put behind them. So we're seeing a lot of billboard campaigns. We've seen a lot of companies do billboards, massive billboard spreads in Times Square, in lots of areas around the country. We're seeing radio spot ads. We're seeing all sorts of sponsorships of different professional athletes. A lot of them are kind of the lower mid tiers, as like the bigger tier athletes are starting to are still considering that. But companies like CBD Distillery have been doing really high profile advertising. Companies like CBD MD have been doing really high profile sponsorship of ex-sports athletes and things like that. There's a great deal of money being spent on these higher profile, more kind of traditional mass channel advertisements and ad placements through through print, through radio, through other channels as well. So I'd be happy to talk about it offline.
Yeah, I think there's something positive happening every day here. Yesterday, Shopify announced that they're going to enable CP brands. I mean, that's a really
Not with Shopify payments, but with Shopify. Not quite there.
But it's, I think it's gonna happen sooner than people think.
Yeah.
There's so much money that these platforms are going to want to make, from payment processing to advertising on Facebook and Google to Amazon. And we're in conversations with them all. So it's just a question of when, not if. And I think it's going to be months, not years.
I think also, I mean, right now you're spending the majority of your marketing budgets on more brand awareness channels, right? So proving the ROI on that and how you get to scale is really difficult. Whenever you start to talk about billboards and these kind of older school tactics that were used in marketing and advertising, those are really the only kind of ways you have. You have like display, but who clicks on a banner ad anymore unless you're maybe being retargeted something you liked. And so really you have to rely on those channels, but honestly you have to get smarter like what Ben's done and like what we're doing on how do you build that grassroots effort internally? How do you rely on a referral program? Like 60% of our customers are repeat purchasers, and they come back within 30 to 60 days. So when we start to look at stats like that, they're doing their own job of fueling our business. Now we can't scale up as fast as we would if we were able to sink some money and start doing some deeper, more social advertising or paid search. That's a matter of time, like you said, but I think the minute that opens up, if you can continue to build great curation, great product, and then get that same kind of repeat rate, that word of mouth is going to be way more powerful than any of the ads that we're not allowed to run right now.
I mean, just to add to that, I think you're going to see like this massive like compounding effect once those channels open up, once the national retailers open up. I mean, we're in 2,000 independent retailers just in New York City, another almost 1,000 in Orange County and LA, and about to launch a number of new markets, and that doesn't include Walmart, Dwaynery, Target, Whole Foods, etc. And so I think next year I think there's going to be even more of an acceleration because these national retailers are not going to just put it in the bag. Like there's not going to be like a category like kombucha or coconut water or collagen where it took years and years to build. This is just going to happen overnight, and they're going to launch with massive end caps. And so I think that's where the big acceleration is going to occur.
Most CBD brands are relying on the retailers to get the word out there about the brand to even exist. I mean, so marketplaces and boutiques and independent retailers, like that's what you really rely on, how you can leverage a big partnership with them.
Well, and the whole impetus of retailers starting to carry these products is because they want brands that are going to drive traffic into their stores. So they're making their decisions based off of who is going to drive traffic into your store. And so, there's a lot of need. You can't just rely on the retailer to do all of your marketing for you. If you have those significant marketing budgets and you have that brand awareness and that consumer awareness and that consumer loyalty, you want people to drive traffic into these brick and mortar retailers, because brick and mortar retailers are of course losing traffic to e-com all the time anyway.
Good. So we're coming to the end of our session. So I want to do a lightning round with you now. So the question is, what in 2020, what are you going to see as, what's going to be the most innovative or creative thing in the CBD space in 2020? If there's a product, a service, a retail, what do you think, what are you looking forward to seeing in 2020? Whoever wants to go first.
You go. Yeah, so I mean, I'm more excited. CBD is on one side, right? And obviously the growth and the market size, et cetera, all of that's really exciting. But to me, I'm really more interested in, as we get more of this clinical research, how we mix other cannabinoid profiles and other terpenes within the plant to create different effects. So I believe in 2020 and moving in 2021, that'll be a bigger conversation because I think most of the people in the cannabis industry are kind of like, all right, CBD. Now what's that?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a similar, like a segmentation by application and use case. And so I think you're going to see, ultimately it's going to be brands that kind of market for those specific solutions. So someone's going to make a competitor to Gatorade, fitness version of a drink that's focused on that value proposition. Someone's going to make one for pain, like we're focused on kind of stress, anxiety, and mental. And so I'm excited to see the innovation on kind of the brand marketing side that comes through as kind of the ingredient becomes somewhat of a commodity for better or worse. I think the only thing I think there's going to be specific brands and companies that emerge for specific kind of applications.
Jeremiah?
I'm really excited about the agricultural impact, a little different tack. The impact on our food supply, the impact on regenerative agriculture, the science and the study that Rodale Institute's doing right now, seeing more results coming out of that, and just seeing the impact that hemp will have.
Okay, and Bethany?
Beauty, drinks, and pets. I think
Beauty, drinks, and pets. Not all together, though.
Yeah, not together, all separate. But I mean, again, the product innovation is driving, and right now what we've started to see, even just over the past few months, is this explosion of product innovation in the beauty space just barely starting to take hold.
Good.
With those channels available, there's a great deal of opportunity there.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that panel as much as I did when I listened to it at the Groceryshop conference. as promised, I wanted to highlight a few items that I believe are worth reinforcing to you guys, my community. The first one I wanted to talk about is a misconception that I think people need to wrap their heads around, and that is around the customer personas of CBD-based products. As the market is maturing and growing, you're going to see more of those personas come out. I think at this point, a lot of people are still considering CBD users as maybe people that are also using marijuana and just kind of adding on that product, or having some different THC, CBD type of products, and it's just kind of an add-on for them. Or it's with people that are kind of jumping into the hype, wanting to get in early, be those millennials or not, but essentially people that are trying to try products early because there's a lot of buzz around them and they're trying to maybe even look cool. I think for whatever reason, most people are assuming those two customer personas. But if you have paid attention to some of the different analyst reports or different surveys that are out there, those misconceptions on a few customer personas couldn't be further from the truth. And brands, I keep using brands all the time in my videos, but a lot of times we're talking about products. But in this particular situation, I'll talk about brand and how important brand is in the future of CBD. Brands need to understand this is happening. There are a lot of different customer personas that are forming. They're going to continue to kind of fragment and form, and that produces opportunities in today's market. Now, targeted brands specifically in CBD are a little bit tougher at this point because you have some of the major tech companies, be that Google or Facebook, that haven't wrapped their heads around CBD and allowing that for some of the targeting marketing, or some other tech companies that maybe are not allowing you to utilize their payment processing, their website platforms, all those types of things. Those things are loosening at this point. I think that day by day, those things are going to be loosening more and more. I think also all of these tech companies know how much money that is involved here, and I don't think any business person at this point wants to leave all that money on the table. And this allowance to do 2019 business tactic strategies that have been effective in the market will allow CBD brands to target and segment customers a lot better. Now, if you paid attention at the beginning of this, when I threw up some of the slides from Brightfield Group, you'll see that there is a growth somewhere in like 2020, 2021-ish time frame when you're going to see the acceleration in the CBD market. That coincides with a lot of people's belief that the FDA will clear up the non-pharmaceutical side of the CBD market around that time, allowing it to be federally legal, put into a lot of different products, be that additives in food and beverage, beauty products, personal care products, nutritional supplements, things like that. So you also saw with some of the slides that you had a massive amount of growth, both from like a retail sales perspective on the overall category. That is because Walmart, Target's, big, massive retailers, Costco's, things like that can get into the market because the risk is taken away. So now they can get into that market and sell products that are CBD based. And then you also saw some of those things I talked about with food and beverage additive, beauty, personal care, supplements, things of that nature, that also taking a larger portion of the overall market because those are allowed to be on there. Big CPG firms can now join the fun because now the risk is kind of taken out there. One of the points that I differ from the Brightfield Group's data is around tinctures. And I just don't believe tinctures long-term is going to be out there. I know that that is a major driver at this point, but honestly, I think that that's going to be dwarfed long-term by general consumable type of products that are focused on natural consumption of just everybody, Americans, middle America. Sally from Iowa is not going to be putting oil tinctures into different products straight into her mouth sublingually or something like that. She's going to eat a food or a drink that's going to have 10 or 25 milligrams of CBD in there. That's the categories in which I believe long-term are going to win. Now, I've mentioned a few times in videos that this hypothetical 18-month head start by brands that can operate in a riskier kind of environment, non-big CPG firms that can operate currently, I have talked about that. I don't believe that this 18-month head start, essentially probably longer than that if they've gotten in already, maybe 3 years at this point, it's not going to create the next billion-dollar brands. Because as this becomes federally legal, you have big CPG, you have retailers jumping in. Those retailers are going to have private label products as well. So a lot of that's going to be taken up in that area. And I believe that the scraps are still going to be great for a lot of these early companies, but I don't believe that they're going to be the ultimate winners. But I really like the point that Benjamin Witte brought up around acquisition. I don't know if I took it to that level when I was making a lot of the commentary these last few months, because I was focused too much on these joint ventures and acquisitions that big CPG companies have been making around marijuana. His point in general really drives home a lot of the things I talk about with big CPG and their lack of innovation internally and how they have to acquire these brands, acquire innovation, acquire growth. I think that's going to happen. His point around this 18-month head start for brands that have CBD-based products is essentially them trying out to be acquired in a sense. And I think that that's what you're going to see a lot with these entrepreneurs. I think that this creates a ton of opportunity for these CBD entrepreneurs, and it's something to think about. Now, the fourth point that I kind of want to make here is that those that are going to get acquired and those that are going to win are going to be much more than just ingredient based or focused on ingredients. I've talked about this a few different times. CBD in general is going to be an additive just like caffeine or anything like that. It's going to be a commodity in a sense. So you have to look past just the ingredient. You have to base your brands around use cases and really focus on brand development, brand creation, really focus around the brand and what the brand is bringing to consumers. I think brands will win here for sure, regardless if they are standalone, they just continue to operate without being acquired. I think that they're going to win, or those are going to be the top targets by big CPG strategics that are looking to acquire a CBD brand to put into their portfolio. Now, if we're talking about use cases in general, I think that by far the one that I'm most bullish on around CBD is through the lens of like anxiety, stress, and sleep. And I believe within food and beverage, the opportunity is as big as the energy drink market. I know that this is going to take a little bit of time, and I think that sleep, the context of sleep, anxiety, holistic wellness, and a lot of these other trends are starting to really pick up steam. But I think it's going to take some years for this to kind of come to this yin and yang between the over-caffeinated society and just how caffeinated we are and how that's creating a lot of issues that we're going to have to counterbalance with something else. But I believe that's kind of the biggest area in my eyes, at least from the categories in which I focus a lot of my attention. And I think that's going to be the use case that is going to prove to be one of the biggest from the non-pharmaceutical side of the CBD market. Now, just a bonus one, I am not somebody that is really big on the science around a lot of things, hemp, marijuana. I'm not somebody that knows too much about that, but what I found extremely interesting listening to this panel was around their focus and looking past just CBD and towards some of the other cannabinoids. After this particular panel, I did start to do a lot of research and started to notice there's a ton of different opportunities, be that synergistic or just standalone, that are going to provide a ton more opportunities for just this market as a whole. So just a bonus one to kind of think about, stay ahead. You guys know that I'm always kind of looking towards the future and trying to help you guys with some of the emerging trends or things to pay attention to. So just wanted to throw that bonus one at you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to help support me, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up button on this video. If this is the first time you've been introduced to my videos, would love for you guys to be a part of my community by subscribing to my channel. I upload several videos just like this weekly. And if you guys want to connect further outside of this platform, I do include all of my social media links down below. I just want to thank you guys again for your time. Hopefully I gave you some value in return, and we'll see you guys on the next video.